What is going on, everyone, and welcome to today's video. And in today's video, we'll be covering part 1, the introduction to learning Fusion 360 for 3D printing. This will be a multi-part series teaching you everything when it comes to Fusion 360 and how to master this program specifically for 3D printing. This program, this course, this series is perfect for anyone who just got into 3D printing, someone who's already into 3D printing, or someone who already has some skill set with 3D modeling and wants to improve their knowledge around it. I'll be covering everything from basics to much more advanced topics, and as well as teaching you everything I know when it comes to creating, designing, prototyping, and as well as making these products and ideas completely 3D printable. So if you have a 3D printer and you're someone that wants to learn how to create your own designs, this series will be perfect for you, as we'll be covering everything in detail. Now, in the very beginning, things will be quite slow, as I'll be covering everything as much as possible, specifically for people who are completely new to 3D modeling. So if you're a little bit more advanced, you can go ahead and skip ahead into future parts, as I'll be releasing at least one per day all the way up to the very end. But more so, this video course is perfect for anyone who wants to either create their own designs, someone who has an existing business or existing projects where they want to create designs and use it for their own personal needs, or someone who wants to build a business around it, whether it's selling products, whether it's selling 3D printing services, or whether it's someone who wants to build a full-time income from 3D printing. Now, in order to create your own designs for 3D printing, you need to learn 3D modeling. There are several 3D modeling softwares out there. There's SolidWorks, Tinkercad, Fusion 360. There's so many out there, and to be honest with you guys, my personal favorite is Fusion 360. Now, of course, that is up to debate whether which one is better. I'll leave that up to you. But if you're someone that's interested in getting the knowledge to learn this programs, more specifically Fusion 360, I'll be covering everything in exact detail and exactly how to make some more intricate designs. That way you can take this and create your own existing and creative projects. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started. Now, the very first thing we'll be covering before we jump into Fusion is the overview of the software, okay? This is assuming that you already have Fusion 360 installed onto your computer with a hobbyist license or even a paid subscription. Now, you don't need a paid subscription to use this program. This actually, Fusion 360, I believe at the time of recording this video, they actually allow up to 10 designs, and it allows you to make money up to $1,000 on a hobbyist license. I'll be leaving a link down below with more details on that. So go ahead, if you haven't already, go ahead and install that onto your computer. For my device that I'm going to be using is an M1 Pro. It's a 16-inch M1 Pro with just the basic specs. I believe it's like 16 gigabytes of RAM. Now, I would suggest getting, if you don't already have a computer with at least 16 gigabytes of more or RAM, as Fusion 360 can be quite intensive, or even a base M1, let's just say Mac Mini or base M1 MacBook Air, or even a Windows computer, as long as your I'm not too familiar with Windows, but as long as your computer is able to withstand or use a program like Fusion. So, of course, it's going to be up to whatever you have, but just letting you guys know some of the computer requirements. Autodesk has some of those features listed on their website, so I would go ahead and check that out if you haven't done so already. The next thing is getting comfortable with your workspace, knowing exactly what to look at, what's the important parts, and as well as exactly what will be useful, especially for 3D printing. The next thing is integrating your slicer with your workspace. So how do you take a design that you have completed within Fusion and then bring that over to your slicer? And lastly, along with this program, with this series, there is a 3D printing community, which I'll be leaving a link down below if you are watching this on YouTube. Additionally, with any course or program, there should also be some sort of community or some sort of backing behind it to help you kind of navigate any questions or concerns that come up. More specifically, let's just say if you're in a classroom setting, and of course, you can't really ask the teacher for help without being there physically. So in this instance, we actually have a community built around this course. So everything you need to learn when it comes to this program, you will have it provided to you in this several part series. And if you have any questions, or if you need to raise your hand, or if you have any comments or concerns, or maybe something didn't click for you or something doesn't make sense, you can actually ask within the community. Either myself or someone else will actually answer those questions for you, and it will make your life so much easier, as you don't have to go through the process of having to figure stuff out on your own. So with that said, go ahead and join the community down below. And with that said, let's go ahead and jump into Fusion 360. Okay guys, so here we are with Infusion 360, and what I have here is a model that I recently had designed. And what I want to do here is kind of quickly go over some important parts and features that will be necessary to Fusion and exactly what you should be looking at when it comes to modeling and designing parts and pieces within Fusion. Now, before you open up a blank canvas or before you do anything, just follow along with me here and watch first before getting into any sort of movements or anything like that. That way you can familiarize yourself with some important features of this program. Now, typically within any sort of 3D modeling software, you have an open canvas. And now this canvas is essentially where it holds all the parts, pieces, bodies, components. Essentially anything you design, create, or sketch will be within this canvas here. And typically you have some sort of viewport or some sort of cube that allows you to reorient your plane, your axis, etc., allowing you to get a complete look of the design that you have within your canvas here. And this is perfect for 3D modeling because we want to get a good look at some of the features of our design. We want to look around, we want to change the perspective, the angles. We want to see and look at what exactly will be important and exactly where we should be modeling. Additionally, on the left-hand side, you have what is called a browser. Now, a browser is essentially what holds all of the components, bodies, which is bodies listed here. For example, this is one body here, but what holds that body is a component, and that's the entirety of it. And typically what you want to do is you want to segment your bodies and create different bodies and create different components, which keeps things organized. Now, typically right now, everything will be thrown at you. There will be a lot of information thrown at you, but I promise you later on, it will make much more sense. Just think of it like there is a universal thing holding this as a nest, and then this giant nest holds everything underneath it, if it makes sense. Additionally, any sketches that you create, any sort of construction planes that you create, construction planes meaning a plane to sketch on, any sort of joints, meaning any sort of moving pieces or parts. If you want to showcase like models are moving or they have a hinge or they rotate in some way, shape, or form, that would be where this would be listed. Any sort of analysis, meaning if you cut the model in half, you can actually see a half portion of the model, so you can kind of get a good look on what it looks like, and as well as the origin, which is where you start in the very beginning of any design. Lastly, is also the document settings, which also actually holds the units. So for example, in 3D modeling, or specifically for 3D printing, typically you'll want it have set to millimeters. And typically this would be the general work area for most designs that you'll be working in, as typically you like to work in millimeters as it gives us a more accurate design, especially since 3D printing is typically worked within millimeters anyway. So with that said, let's go ahead and close these settings here and just get a good idea that this browser tab here is just basically where it holds the general parts and pieces that make up your, basically, if you think of it like a Lego, and the general idea is like you have one Lego brick, which is a body, and then you have multiple Lego bricks, which could be like a component, and then you have the entire piece itself, which is basically the entirety of the design, if that makes sense. The next thing on this list is the general tools and features that allow us to create, sketch, and essentially create new designs. So here we have the design interface, generative design, render, animation, simulation, manufacture, and drawing. Now, don't be intimidated by this as of right now because you don't need to know all of these. In reality, you really just need to know the design workspace, especially for 3D printing. Perhaps later on we'll be covering rendering, as renderings gives us a more accurate look of our design. Generative design and simulation will be blanked out if you are on a hobbyist license. But if you have a paid license, you'll be able to use these features. You have animation, so you can actually animate your designs, although it may not be a really nice animation. Basically, if you're working with clients or if you're trying to get a good idea on how your product works or how it functions, or if you're trying to showcase to someone, animating your designs is perfect as it gives you a good visual view as to how your product works. You have manufacture, and then you have drawing, which honestly, I personally don't use those. But in your case, if you have a need for it in a future time, then that would be a good idea to segment into and to learn more about. But typically when you're in the design workspace, you have typically 6 main settings here. You have solid, surface, mesh, sheet metal, plastic, and utilities. Now, typically what these tabs are is essentially what it's for. And think of it like a general tool. Solid, so meaning all these general tools will pertain to creating solids and modifying solids. You have surface, which is modifying surfaces and creating them and creating forms and stuff like that. Then you have mesh, which is adding or importing meshes. Like if you ever had to import an STL file to a CAD program, this is where you would do it. Or if you had to fix or repair some sort of STL or OBJ file, this is where you would do it. Sheet metal, of course, is for sheet metal. I personally have not used this. Plastic, and then utilities. Now, of course, you don't need to know all of these. The most important piece really is the solid section, especially for this several part series. So this is where we're going to be hanging out most of the time anyway. So with that said, one additional thing I also want to leave you guys with is this timeline section. This is the general timeline. So anything or any feature, any sketch, any design, anything you ever do within this canvas here will show up here as a feature. And for example, if I extruded this up, this would show up here. If I created a new component or position, this would show up in here, right? So anything I do would show up within this timeline. And what this timeline allows me to do is to go back in time and make changes or edits in case I ever want to do anything. That way I don't have to start from the very beginning. Think of it like a Control-Z, but a little bit with a more leeway to go and edit certain Control-Zs, if that makes sense. If you're coming from video editing, or if you've ever edited something, or if you ever tried to undo something within your iPhone, think of it like that. So with that said, that's your general timeline in Workspace. So what I want to do now is open up a quick blank canvas and allow you guys to get some time to kind of free roam within the program and actually do that. So with that said, go ahead and open up a blank canvas with Infusion. And then you should have something that looks like this. So here we are with Infusion. You should have a completely blank canvas. Now, what I want you guys to know is that if you guys are going to be working with Infusion, you have several different options. You have a mouse and a keyboard that you can work with. So I'm using a Keychron K1, I believe, and a Logitech Ergo mouse. Now, you don't need these specific products. There are so many products and so many mouses that you can choose from. So don't feel obligated to purchase anything. If you have an existing keyboard and mouse setup, that should be absolutely fine. If you are working on a laptop like a MacBook or something like that, if you don't have a mouse or anything like that, I would suggest you do so, since it's a little bit different to work on a trackpad on a MacBook, which you definitely could. But personally, in my opinion, I've tried working with a trackpad on my MacBook and it just wasn't the most pleasant experience. I personally like to sit down and make all changes and edits within a mouse and keyboard. Now, if you do have a MacBook and you do have an additional mouse as a cursor, that's just fine. So meaning that if you could use your keyboard on your MacBook and your mouse as the external cursor, that works just fine as well. But honestly, a trackpad would not be the way to go. Now, I know there's many people that will probably suggest one, but it's completely up to you. As you get into more advanced designs and concepts, you will want to learn this and get used to a proper workflow first thing before moving on into later subjects. So with that said, in order to go and move and kind of get a good understanding of your canvas here, what I want you guys to do is get familiar of how to move within the 3D environment. So within your mouse, you have a scroll wheel. And if you look at your scroll wheel, if you scroll up, you zoom in. You scroll out, you zoom out, okay? That's the general idea, and I think most of us get a good understanding of that. What I want you guys to get familiar with, though, is clicking the scroll wheel and actually moving around the canvas. So here we have, if you were to click and hold your scroll wheel, it allows you to move around the canvas in a up, down, right, left format, and this gives you more control as to what you're looking at. Additionally, if you want to go the extra mile, so if you are comfortable with that, you can hold Shift on your keyboard. So I'm holding Shift, then I'm clicking my scroll wheel, and now this allows me to navigate in a 3D way. So if you imagine this is the origin, the center, I'm navigating around the center of my environment here, and this is great. So if we're looking at an actual file here, this allows me to reorient and to look around my model in any way, shape, or form I want, and allows me to look at my product in different angles, which is really useful, especially for 3D modeling. Now, what I want you guys to do is just get familiar with this. Get a general feel of this. Move around the canvas, zoom in and out. Hold Shift. Get used to holding Shift. Shift is going to be your very best friend, especially when it comes to 3D modeling. So if you're someone that has come from Blender or any sort of 3D modeling software, this will feel somewhat familiar to you. But just keep in mind, Fusion 360 operates a little differently, and there's several features and things that will be slightly different. But overall, just get a good idea as to how this program works. Now, we pretty much wrapped up most of today's topic in terms of the video and in terms of what we're going to cover. What I want to do now is quickly go over some last minute details that will also be important. Now, here we have this bottom section here. Now, I did not go over this. This is something that I skipped right over. And the reason for this is because this little tool here at the bottom, although it's not so important, you may accidentally change this and not know it. So what I want to do now is quickly go over some features to this that will be useful for you. Now, you have orbit, which allows you to orbit around the canvas. You have free orbit, yes. And this allows you to get a kind of like a better orientation around it, kind of like in a 3D way. This is basically just unconstrained, so you're basically kind of rotating in the direction that you're moving in. So I don't personally use this myself, but you can also play with it and tinker with it and see if it's useful for you. I personally just like to have a constrained orbit as it keeps things nice and easy for me, and I could revolve around my item in a way that's a little bit more manageable, if that makes sense. Another feature we have here is look at, which essentially just, if you click on look at and you select a certain face, it just basically reorients it to look at that item there. Now, I'm not sure why it did that the first time. Let's do that one more time. Click that. So if I click look at, select this face, and it's going to reorient to that face specifically. Now, you can actually do this by actually right-clicking on your scroll wheel, and it should automatically kind of look at whatever it is whatever you clicked on. It won't more so kind of look at the face specifically, but it will kind of zoom in as to what you're looking at there. Here you have pan, which allows you to pan around the canvas itself. Now, obviously, you could just use the scroll wheel for that. You don't have to select pan. Here you have zoom, which is basically zooming in and out. It's pretty self-explanatory. Zoom window, so if you want to zoom at a specific piece or part, that's exactly what you'll be using this for, etc. Now, one additional thing, these last three parts here, is the first thing is multiple views. So if you want to have multiple views of the product that you're making or you're designing, you can set up multiple views. So you can look at this perspective, at a front perspective, side view, top view. So this is more useful, for example, if you're someone that is 3D modeling something or like a certain component or part or piece, and you want to make sure that everything is either symmetrical or parts and pieces don't affect another part and piece, or et cetera, et cetera. Or if you want to, for example, showcase something like this to a client and you want to give them a general look as to how the product looks without having to navigate around and look for that piece specifically, this is a perfect guide for that. Now, typically, I don't like using this very often, just as not really applicable for what I'm trying to do, but for you, it could be very different. The next thing is grid and snap. So typically, you want to have layout grid toggle on because your grid is basically one of the most important pieces to designing and sketching. So you want to have that toggled on. Then you have snap to grid, grid settings, incremental move, and then setting increments. Now, just leave it to the default settings. Typically, this is what I'm personally used to, and I think you guys will benefit from this as well. The last thing is the display settings. So here you have the visual styles, you have environment, effects, visibility, camera, and ground plane offset. And what this essentially does is that the visual style allows you to change how the object looks within your canvas. So here you have wireframe, and now you can see all the little details within my product here. Now, personally for me, this is too much. This doesn't let me see exactly what I need to see. So typically for me, I like to operate within a shaded with hidden edges, so I can see some of this. Now, it allows me to see the shaded regions with those hidden edges. Now, of course, this is still a little bit too much for me. Now, typically, if you have a simpler design, this might be useful, but I would say shaded with visible edges is the best bet, as it doesn't show all those details that are behind the design and that parts you don't see. I only want to see the parts that are useful to me, and more specifically, what I'm going to be working on. Additionally, you have shaded, which is basically this design kind of looks like it's rendered in a way, but it's not really rendered. It's just more so just without those lines appearing in I guess in CAD, if that makes sense. Now you have visual style, you have wireframe with hidden edges and visible edges. Go ahead and play around with these settings. Of course, what is useful to you may not be useful to someone else. So personally for me, like I said, visible edges is the way I go with this. Now, of course, I don't have Now, of course, I know you guys don't have anything on your canvas just yet, but just kind of get a feel for this and kind of get a good idea on what this does. You have, for environment, dark sky. You have gray room. You have photo booth, which is the default. And Tranquility Blue, Infinity Pool, and River Rubicon. Now, I'm not going to go into all the details of those, but of course, you get the general idea. That doesn't generally affect your design. This just more so affects the canvas and the area you're working on. Then you have effects. So typically, if you want to add a dome, ground plane, ground shadow, ground reflection, object shadow, etc., typically these are the settings that I have it preset to, and this is actually the preset settings I had set with Infusion. So yours should not look very much different than mine. Additionally, object visibility, just having it set to its preset is also great. Camera, you can get an orthographic view or a perspective view. So with that said, that's pretty much the general idea of this tutorial. One additional thing I do want to cover right before I let you guys go is kind of setting this up to work within your slicer. So here I have this design here. So in order to do this, what I want you guys to do is go ahead to your blank canvas and let's go ahead and create a quick design. Now it's going to be very simple, so don't feel intimidated by this, but let's go ahead and go to sketch, go to reorient the plane so we can actually design on this bottom plane here. And now from here, Fusion will automatically reorient us to that plane we're deciding to sketch on. Now what I want you guys to do is go to center diameter circle, select that, go to the middle, and now you should go and select this very middle origin. You'll feel this kind of snap on to the center of this. Click on that and drag this out. Now it doesn't matter what diameter or what radius you set it to, just drag it out. From here, let's go ahead and reorient it so we can kind of get a side profile of this. Now what I want you to do now is click on Finish Sketch. From here, now we can take this sketch and turn this into a physical body. So press E on your keyboard, so you should press E. Additionally, you could also click on this little feature here right next to Sketch, and then from here, just drag this arrow up. Let's just say about 50 millimeters. From here, press OK. And now you have a basic primitive, which is a cylinder. Now, in order to send this off to your slicer, what I want you to do now is go to your body. So you should have a body automatically pop up within this section here. Right-click on that, save as mesh. And now you should have this little pop-up box come up. Now, what this allows you to do is allows you to save this as an OBJ, as an STL, as a 3MF, and it's to whatever you want. But the main feature I want you guys to know is the output, which is send to 3D print utility. By default, I believe it's automatically turned off, but you want to turn this on. And then from here, you're going to want to go to print utility and set this to custom. Now from here, if you're using Bamboo Studio, if you're using Prusa, if you're using any other slicer other than Cura or Preform, then you want to select custom. But if you are using Cura, you can go ahead and select Cura. If you are using Preform, then go ahead and select that. From there, since I'm using Bamboo Studio, you also want to set up your application. So you would click on this little folder, select your application, whichever application you're using, then toggle that, and then whatever slicer you're using will be shown up here. After that, once you have the file ready to go, just press OK. And now by default, Fusion will automatically send over that body we created within Fusion and have it within our slicer. How cool is that? It's super simple, it's super easy, and now you can scale this down, reorient this, do whatever you want, add some sort of change the settings, add settings, whatever it is you want, so you can slice it, and now I can send this off to print, and I didn't have to do anything else other than just export it as STL to my slicer. So that pretty much wraps up today's video. This is just a quick overview of Fusion 360. Now, I know I've thrown a lot of topics and ideas right at you, and it might be very confusing at first, but just keep in mind this is a process that takes time to learn, as 3D modeling is not a simple subject, but over time you'll get familiar with it, you'll learn a little bit more about it, and typically you'll find that 3D modeling can be very enjoyable, especially once you get the core concepts down and things become much easier. So with that said, hope you guys enjoyed today's video. Let me know if you have any questions, comments, or concerns down below in the comment section, as well as make sure to join the community with the link in the description, as every single question you guys have will be answered within that community. So if you have any questions, or if you hit a roadblock or anything like that, you can go ahead and answer it within that community, and as well as more details about the course will be listed there as well. So with that said, this is Brandon signing out, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.